Hello, everyone. I wanted to give you a quick note about this episode with Eran Gil. We did have some audio issues when recording this episode, and we ended up deciding to edit the episode down more than we usually do because of those issues. But we didn't want to throw it away because there was just too much good content, and the conversation was amazing. So I hope you enjoy this episode, and sorry if you run into any audio issues along the way. Thank you again. Enjoy. Welcome to Not Another CEO podcast. I'm your host, David Politis. Every week, we talk to inspiring leaders and get the true stories, the ups and downs, the lessons learned, and come away with actionable advice for our own journeys. Today's guest is a world-class operator whose companies have been instrumental in moving some of the largest enterprises in the world to the cloud. He was the co-founder of Cloud Sherpas, which is where I met him. Cloud Sherpas was one of the earliest and most successful Google Cloud partners that ended up expanding to become one of Salesforce and ServiceNow's top partners. Cloud Sherpas was acquired by Accenture in 2015. He's now CEO of a global cloud consulting company that helps enterprises around the world fully unlock the value of the cloud with a focus on AWS, Salesforce, and Snowflake. Please welcome a very close friend of mine, CEO at AllCloud, Eran Gil.
Thank you, David. I appreciate it. I'm happy to be here.
I'm very excited for this. Let's jump right into it, Eran. What's the one thing that you've done at AllCloud, big or small, that's had the biggest impact and you'll absolutely do again if you're CEO of another company in the future?
Yeah, I think there's quite a few things that when you think of what you've done throughout the period of being a CEO, you probably want to repeat. But there was one item or one piece of my sort of nature and reality as being CEO that I will never or never forget again, or never and always repeat in other instances. And that's making sure that I am continuously transparent with our organization. And I do that through the form of sending a monthly email. By now, having been in this role for a little over 6 years, I've sent north of 70 emails to the company. Within those emails, I share quite a bit of information about the organization. Regularly, I tell them the state of the business financially, and I am fully transparent about the P&L at that point in time and sort of our state of the union in terms of the business up to that point in the year relative to other years and so forth. And then additionally, I add anecdotal information about the period that has passed. Most of the time, it's somewhere between 3 to 6 weeks that I take between each email that I send. But these are very comprehensive. They're lengthy. Some will say too comprehensive and lengthy, but I prefer to share more than less. And it's just kept people pretty attuned with what's the state of the business and what we're doing daily.
So every week, when you talk about these emails, do you write the emails yourself every week for 6 years? You write it yourself?
Yeah. So I do it on a monthly basis, and I write them completely on my own. I don't have any writer. I don't have anybody that suggests material. I feel like that has create authenticity in the emails. They see the good and the bad in the way that I depict where we are as a business. I do collect the data from data that we collect otherwise, such as our FP&A organization, our metrics associated with it as well. But I've put it all together on my own. I do allow my CMO at times to just make sure that it's written in a way that is English appropriate rather than a broken English, given the fact that I am not originally an English speaker, but otherwise it's all me.
Wow, Eddie. And you and I have talked about this in the past, my experience at Better Cloud Sherpas, like we've talked about these emails in the past. And one of the things that I personally, or I know a lot of CEOs get concerned about is like putting all that information into the hands of your employees in an email that's easily forwardable, or, does that,
Yeah.
does that, are you concerned about that?
Yeah. I mean, it's a legit concern, and transparency uh, does come with a price, but I think the reward is greater than the risk. And so, from a risk perspective, yes, it is forwardable. However, uh, good solutions out there have allowed for uh, monitoring of emails and data, and especially leaks, especially from emails. So we have a pretty stringent uh, rules in place about, and rules technology that supports those rules, that allows people to forward copy or do otherwise anything with material that we are sending internally. However, people could come up with creative ideas, print screen and such, and they could come up with ways to share that information. And to me, it all comes down to what I'm getting in return. And in return, I view the 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 reward of tying folks and employees to our daily um, results, or weekly results, or monthly results, as a more important aspect of sharing information, of being transparent, for the good and the bad, by the way. It's not always going to be great news. Um, Greater than what I may be risking. At the end of the day, an organization like ours is 100% uh, founded on our ability to execute in the marketplace. We're not rocket scientists. We're not delivering necessarily IP that is unique to a professional and managed services organization. We do good work, provide great service, and push other businesses forward through the technology that we implement or transform them to. And so I view whether we are $100 million, $200 million, $300 million, profitable or non-profitable, as a simple data point. No more than that. It doesn't tell our story. It doesn't share information about how we approach projects or how we do them necessarily. It simply suggests that we are today at scale and are able to sort of do the work that we're doing and the segments that we're doing, the verticals that we chose to participate in. Oh, that's why I like to share that information.
So one of the things, you know, in Cloud Sherpa's case, you were one of the co-founders of Cloud Sherpas. The DNA of the company, the culture, everything, really, you were a huge part of that. And it was a reflection of you, I believe, in many ways. Um, when you think about AllCloud, this is not the company that you founded. You joined as a CEO. Um, how is that experience different than being the founder?
Yeah, it's a vastly different experience. When you come in as a professional, quote unquote, CEO that had the experience of running a similar organization that is bringing uh, best of breed practices to an organization that already exists, um, there is a process, a time lag between the time you join to when you get to a point where everybody buys into one, your vision, the new processes you bring in place, the new practices you bring to place, until the founders told me, you know what? We've seen the results. We understand what you came here to do. We have full trust in what you're doing moving forward, and we're behind you. We'll push as hard as we can. Our interests are aligned. Whereas as a founder, um, you may have the opposite experience, because unless you're like yourself, who was a founder and CEO, which I was not, you actually have to experience that process of willing to let go a little bit and willing to trust someone else and willing to
Do you think that when you came in to All Cloud, um, were you able to bring your way of working, your culture? Like, what did people accept that? Not just the founders, but like, did the team accept that and kind of embrace that, or was there a kind of a period where they had, forget the founders, like the actual team, that they had to trust you and buy into that? Because I feel like, especially for you, you are a hard charging executive. Like, stylistically, it's a you have a way that can, if people didn't buy into that way of doing business, that can be something that takes time to kind of get used to. Did you feel that with the team? How did you get over that?
So, a two-part answer to the question. One, when you come into an organization, you will assume the founders, being entrepreneurs, depending on the stage that you're coming in at, have already put their mark in terms of mostly hard charging. Because at the end of the day, entrepreneurs, you can't build a company by sort of uh, a laissez-faire attitude. You're not going to be hard charging. You're going to do sort of the work-life balance is more important. That's just not going to work. So the assumption is that the team is there because of those founders, and those founders are already hard charging. In my case, that was obvious. Not to mention, both of the founders were actually Israeli, which are inherently hard charging. And then myself, I will tell you that it did require some adjustment to myself, but also it did require transformation in the organization. And this is the second part answer, which is I brought with me a group of people that had come to the organization because they already knew who I was, because they were willing to work in the environment that I created in the past and that I will create in the future. And so you're sort of you're sort of assuming that the existing organization is already a hardworking, hard charging organization. And in my case, that's my style, as you suggested. And so as we continue to transform the organization, I will bring and have brought with me a lot of folks that are very aligned to that style of of work and management.
The company is how big now, employee wise,
415 employees worldwide.
and how many countries?
We work in 7 different countries around the world.
Is that's a new challenge? I mean, we you didn't have that at Cloud Sherpas, where like literally worldwide, every time zone, everything. Um, how do you handle keeping the team aligned? How do you handle your own work across all these time zones? How do you handle the different cultures? Like, for me, it feels slightly overwhelming when I think about having people in all the different countries and all. How do you approach that? How do you handle that?
So first, it's overwhelming. By far, the smaller you are as an organization, having people in multiple geographies that are vastly different in both time zone and cultures is a very challenging. You then look at sort of the very global organization, the world global organization, especially in our world, which are the global system integrators. And you say, well, that's not unique, but it is unique because it's not typical to find a 400 to a 500 people company that is so geodiverse. Um, for us, I think that the number one challenge was our cultures. The various cultures within this organizations are vastly different. It's how you communicate with each other. It's, are you more charging or less? Is there a work-life balance or not? In the US and in Canada, for that matter, a very different world. Even within North America for us, which is one region, US and Canada are different. And then you have this other part of the world, which is European. And in the pan-European market, there are so many different cultures. And we chose to first operate and go to market in the DACH region, which includes Germany, Switzerland, and Austria. And only after several years of operating there did we understand the vast cultural difference between a German and an Austrian, and even how they treat each other, albeit speaking the same language and with a slight difference in dialects. And then the Romanians, if you think about it, it has been 40 years before since they have transitioned from being a communist country. And that was a whole other ballgame in terms of cultural differences. And so what I did initially is I focused on making sure that within the executive leadership team, we have the right personnel to overcome those cultural challenges, because it is very difficult if you're operating within an executive team that actually accentuates the cultural differences rather than tries to build those bridges. So that was the number one thing that we focused on. The second is, and I will say, we focused with that executive team on understanding the various cultures. So did actual exercises, actual coaching we do an executive leadership team offsite every 6 months for planning and otherwise. And we did coaching throughout this by external coaches, not by folks that are actually within the organization. Then I also brought a very strong chief people officer to help educate and build those bridges. And in some part, he's done that through the various engagements with teams and visits into those locations, but also um, through material that can educate them. So there's a book that sits on my windowsill, which is called The Culture Map. And it is exactly what you would imagine. There's actual studies that support that book, material that shows where different cultures lie on different key indicators. And it was very interesting to read. We shared it several times with different people in the organization. Sometimes it was used against us when people would say, well, this is why it's hard to work with this team, because look at where we stand and where they stand on this particular metric on this map. And that actually helped conversations develop, overcome these challenges, although people wanted to highlight that as a challenge. And so I think the number one aspect to managing that is to overcome the cultural issues. The time zones, well, as a CEO, knowing that in advance, you made a choice. You made a choice that your day starts at 5 a.m. You made a choice that by 9, Israel awakens and starts sending your emails. So after you put your kids to bed and you may have had dinner with your wife, you start doing emails again. But you find a balance there. So time zones are difficult. The other aspect that particularly is difficult for an organization that is Israeli and American and European is the fact that Israel has a different work week. And that is a big challenge because not only time zones are limiting, so Israel, Colorado is a 9-hour difference. For the West Coast, it's a 10 hours different. For the East Coast, it's a 7 hours different. But also, because of the time zone and because of the difference in the work week that starts on Sunday and ends on Thursday, there's only 3.5 days that both sides of the pond work together. And so that creates a whole other limitation, which I'm lucky in that my leadership is one that is not shying away from picking up the phone or getting on a call on a Sunday or on a Friday if need be in Israel. So we've overcome it. I will say it's taxing. It takes time to get used to it. But once you got it going, it's actually a very easy challenge to overcome.
One of the things you mentioned, you have a lot of people in Israel. Um, obviously for the last year, Israel had been in the middle of this major conflict. And uh, how have you handled that? And has that adds like a whole nother level of complexity to this dynamic? How have you handled that?
It's always been in some level of conflict. In the last year, it's been extreme. And so you learn how to navigate it. But the conflict isn't actually inside of the country. And so it allows the economy to continue to develop and evolve. The other thing that you got to remember is the entire organization comes together to support that region in conflict. So for us, we have folks in Romania, we have folks in the mainland of Europe, we have folks in the North American market. And much to everybody's surprise, everybody lends a hand to actually support the customers in that region and the employees that are in that region. And lastly, I will say we are lucky that a lot of our customers that we serve, even if they had originated in Israel, say a software company that actually sells outside of Israel, but has somewhere in the organization in Israel that we support, ultimately isn't dependent on the Israeli environment from an economic standpoint. And so they never cease to ask for help. And we may be transitioning our support then from the Israeli team to a European team or Eastern European team or a US team. But at the end of the day, most of our customers aren't sitting in Israel to support a business that actually is evolving around the Israeli economy. That's not to suggest that the Israeli economy is in trouble. On the contrary, it's doing very well and continues to move forward and push forward.
So one of the things around that is similar between Cloud Sherpas and AllCloud is that in both cases, you've really hitched the wagon of your business to these big platforms, Google, AWS, Snowflake, ServiceNow, Salesforce. Like you, um, can you talk about that? Because I think that more and more, at least in my experience, I'm seeing more and more businesses, whether it's technology businesses or services businesses, doing that, having to basically with these bigger platforms and rely on them in many ways for their business. So can you talk about that? Because that's the commonality between both of the businesses you've been a part of.
Yeah, and I think I have an interesting comment about the software businesses or the product businesses also tying themselves to one of these vendors. But let's start with first, there are two types of organizations in our space. There are those that are at scale and those that are not. And within those, there are those that um, choose to be agnostic to the underlying technology that they help promote in the marketplace, and those that choose to be call it a partner of partners. So they look to hitch their wagon to a particular vendor and build upon that. My experience has been the that the time to scale in our market, being a dedicated partner of larger software vendors, in our case, cloud software vendors, actually accelerates. And therefore, we made that choice at Cloud Sherpas, and partially because we started as three guys in a basement and we needed to take a bet on one ecosystem rather than trying to be the jack of all trades and a master of none in all ecosystems. And we've also seen it work. There were examples prior to us, companies like Hyperion and Blue Wolf that did successfully inside of the Salesforce ecosystem. So we made that choice back then in Google. And then alongside strategic discussions with investors and with internal folks, we've decided to sort of expand beyond one ecosystem. In this case, we had a similar approach, except we started by acquiring two different companies, one in one ecosystem and the other in the other, AWS and Salesforce. And at the time, they weren't really related or connected, which they are today, but each of them was very dedicated to those partners. To me, that accelerated or that enabled the acceleration of our go to market, our ability to actually drive demand for our services quicker, um, and our ability to gain the mind share of the folks that are running the channel organizations in those companies and also the sellers in the field. In terms of our organization, it lets us develop high level of expertise and focus in a very particular ecosystem, but more importantly, in with vendors that are innovating nonstop. And simply trying to become the experts of the AWS services, which are hundreds of services equals products, and then the Salesforce products or clouds as they call them is a task of its own, and it's a not a regular affair at all. And so, at our size and scale, even though within the boutique space of system integrators we are relatively at scale, it provided us a leg up compared to others in terms of our relationship with a vendor, their ability to promote us in the marketplace, their ability to count on us as being experts in their particular domain rather than suggesting that we're experts and maybe falling on that or failing on that promise because we're really trying to do too much. I see it happening in the product world too, and that is because each one of these organizations, especially when it comes to cloud, and the cloud enabled that in many ways, has created an entire marketplace. That if you simply think of this scale that AWS has created for its own services, running at over $100 billion run rate. Imagine now you're able to take a bet and attach yourself to every time someone consumes AWS, they need to consume your product as well in one way or another. And because of that, um, product companies have now decided to take a bet on a vendor. I see the product companies, though, diversifying sooner than what a services company would, because the services, we're not building a product that could then be replicated to another ecosystem or operate on another, call it hyperscaler, or integrated into another software like ServiceNow or Salesforce or Workday and such. We have to teach people to be experts in the field. And so that takes a longer period of time. The scale that is required to actually um, or the amount of effort that you need to be able to scale with people is far greater than with the product space.
It's interesting. I remember in the early days of Cloud Sherpas, I remember um, wondering to myself, this is an amazing business doing this for Google. Why don't we just do it for every platform? And from the outside looking in, and in those early days, I was like, this could be you know this huge company that doesn't. And then you realize how complex it is, and that's, we're talking about 12, 15 years ago, how complex it is just to your point, to be an expert in one of these things is quite, it's so much work that you do start to understand over time why they're the specialists around each of these ecosystems, because the platforms are so big, changing so quickly, that the only way to really be successful is to have that expertise and make that investment.
Yeah, and if you think about it, even though let's take the hyperscalers as an example, Google or Google Cloud, AWS, Azure within Microsoft, even though they solve this same problem for a customer, whether it is to modernize their infrastructure and move it to the cloud through containers, or even transform, completely refactor a solution and build it in a serverless environment. Every one of these concepts is different, vastly different in every one of these hyperscalers. So if I want to work in a Lambda, which is the serverless environment of AWS, or Google Functions, which is the serverless environment of GCP, I have to learn a different set of skills to be able to perform that at a customer environment. It is very difficult. You will also find that, therefore, occurring in the GSIs, in the global system integrators. You'll find experts in AWS. You'll find experts in Google. You won't find people that are necessarily saying, I could do it all. I could implement Salesforce and I could implement Dynamics. That's just not going to be what 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 you'll find in any of these organizations.
When you think about your time at AllCloud, what is the biggest challenge you faced over these last 6 years, and how have you overcome that challenge?
Yeah, I think I'll probably go back to your discussion around the multi geos, and I think it remains a challenge to overcome the inherent uh, block that people at times have in terms of accepting other cultures or accepting um, a different style of work. And I'll give you an example. The North American market, very procedural, very process oriented. Uh, what's written is what's provided, no more, no less. It is contractually binding. Whereas in Israel, you'll find someone agreeing on concepts or the work to be done over a handshake or over an email. And I had to, quite frankly, work very hard over time to actually eradicate the behavior of how things could and would be done in Israel, because I didn't come from that culture. In my world, I am very Americanized, even though born and raised in Israel, as it relates to business operations. And so it's taking me a long time to overcome these through education, through processes, through continuous monitoring of people and how they operate. And quite frankly, it does create a little bit of overhead. It does require m- somewhat more management, more abilities around in country that are aligned with other cultures. And it's, as I said, it's not just the how we speak, the language, the tonation, the approach. It's also about how you do business. A German customer, for example, is a customer that takes a very long time to bring along, um, to ultimately pull the trigger on doing something, especially when it comes to transforming their existing business, which we essentially do through technology. And so it's very hard in this case for a US resident or a US seller and a Israeli seller to understand the concepts of why can't they move faster? Why can't we make decisions faster? Why do we have to go through these endless processes plus endless, um, sort of authorities inside an organization to actually move it along, move the project along, move the opportunity along. It took a long time to understand that, and I'll leave you with one last example. The Germans aren't forthcoming unless you pursue it. They're not going to come and say, um, "Oh, I have a problem with David, even though he's CEO, and here are my problems. And if that doesn't work, it doesn't work. But I don't want to be here, or that's not the person I want to work for, and so on and so forth." They'll just simply one day up and leave, and they will have never talked to you about it. They will have never suggested that there's a problem. They would have acted as business as usual for eternity until they decided to up and leave. They will not voice concerns. But if you seek it and you push them a little bit, You may find one or two that will share more and divulge more information about things that you care to know. And because ultimately you want to keep them in the company, you want to conserve the sort of the team that you've built. You don't want overly, you don't want to churn a lot of folks or treat a lot of folks. And so you care about what people think and you are willing to change if that's what's required. Um, that's not going to happen in every culture. And so we've had to really fine tune and balance that. And I've explained before how we did that, but a lot of that is done through the proper leadership, not to mention an in-country leadership that actually understands the culture and can transcend cultures, which is the critical aspect.
Throughout your career, have you had people you look to, mentors, people who've coached you that have helped you as you've grown and gone from three guys in a garage to running a 450 person global organization? Like, where do you learn from?
So I have had a multitude of people that I've learned from. And I got mentors that have taught me what it means to sell in an environment like a boiler room. And I've had mentors that have taken some of the good of that and the terrible of it, extract it, and then push you forward to learning how to behave in a different environment where people aren't used to it or are willing to accept it. And that's critical. Um, and so throughout my career, what I ended up finding that I take the good and the bad, but the good in every encounter with every leader that has been my leader, whether I have the utmost respect to him with no questions asked. If he says jump, I'll ask how high, all the way through. I will never work with that person again. But boy, have I learned a lot of lessons from being in their sort of chain of command or being in leadership position within their organization. So, from a mentorship standpoint, I never I have found that now folks actually go and seek mentorship, and I think that's actually very important. And I found myself uh, really um, learning from any person I have worked for historically, and have taken small parts um, of their style to sort of push my own style forward, move my own style forward. Some stuck for a period of time. I'll say one last thing. My dad ultimately was my true mentor. There are things that he taught me today that I will never forget, and they keep me personally um, very aligned with sort of who I was 20 years ago and what I am today. There are particular aspects of his style of management, and he managed many more people than I did. In fact, he managed 4,500 employees and he had 400 managers or leaders. The size of my company today is only the leadership team that he had historically in his sort of the highest position he's taken as a leader, and he's taught me a lot through that period of time.
What do you think is the number one lesson you've learned from him that has stuck with you?
The number one lesson for me is persistence and follow through. Um, so my father would never let go. And he's negotiated deals in the billions of dollars. He was in the Israeli aerospace industry. He built a lot of airplanes and aerospace products. And he's negotiated with the leaders of Lockheed and Airbus and Boeing. And um, there are stories about him essentially uh, sitting at the negotiation table taking a break because they're at a breaking point, and basically telling his legal counsel, his CFO, his head of sales, that they should call home and say, "We're going to miss coming back home." And they were about to come back right for a holiday in Israel. And he said, "Call him up, tell him you won't be there because we're not leaving until this is done." And those are real stories. They were told many times to me through other people. And then the other piece is the follow through. My father has this concept of drawing a loop on a wall and on a board, and saying, "You never leave an open loop. You always close the loop." And sometimes to people, and this is where cultures are different, it seems over the top. You don't always have to be the one that sends the last email to confirm that everything's okay. But my dad always did. He wanted to make sure, even if there wasn't anything concrete to tell you at the time, that you knew he was taking care of it, that you knew what the timeline is to when you will be receiving additional information from him. I've learned a lot from that. I've taught that to a lot of people. I will tell you, it helped a lot of people, in my opinion, because people have a tendency generally to steer away from continuous communication. It's just not most people's style. And I think actually today it's probably one of the more important thing and aspects in project management or sales leadership or salesmanship, because people want to know that they're being taken care of. And that's something that he taught me, only continuously have come my entire career with me, and I've learned a lot from it.
So one more question on this particular topic. Did he explicitly teach it to you, or did you learn it through osmosis of watching him operate?
The latter, almost entirely, other than when I asked him why, on the closing the loop concept, I've asked him, "Why do you feel the need to do the last step? Why do you feel the need, even though someone knows you may not be able to answer him right away? Why do you feel the need to tell them right away what can you do at that point in time for him, and what will you do at any other point in time for him?" And he taught me essentially that, after I have sort of absorbed it through observation, he taught me that, he said, everybody wants to know they're being taken care of. Everyone. Um, it's odd because the generation of today, it isn't second nature to them at all, because they're so digitally oriented that there is, why can't the chatbot do it for me? Or I'll just send a note over chat, or, whatever. It's just not, just not inherent. And for me, it's second nature today. In Cloud Sherpas, I used to say, not a lot of things differentiate us, but what does is that we'll always fanatically respond to a customer or a partner's need, because others may not.
I remember distinctly, I tell people all the time, and it stuck with me actually. I remember in the early days of Cloud Sherpas when I got there and I said, "Hey, Eran, can you help me? I'm trying to connect with this person at Google and this and that." And you, and I had sent some email and I CC'd you, and I said something to the effect of, I wanted to set up some time. Does this time work? Does this time work? And you said to me, "No, no, no, we're we're serving them, their customers, everything else. You're just going to write to them and tell them, I'm available anytime that you're available." And I remember that distinctly, actually, because then I remember them saying to me, "Hey, we need you to jump on a call with a customer or whatever." And I said, "Oh," like literally live. They texted me and I was on the call with the customer in 2 minutes. And I remember that changed the entire relationship with Google for me. Was they knew that that I was going to follow through, that I was there, that I was responsive, that I was, and it was very much from what I still to this day, I'll email someone and I'll think to myself, like, especially in the partner type relationship, hey, I'm free when you're free. I'm going to make myself available. I'm going to be there for you. I'm going to service your customer. I'm going to over communicate with you. So I also, so I guess I learned through you from your dad, that lesson.
Yeah, and to be fair, I mean, it's not easy as you sort of climb up the ladder and you're the CEO and everything, not everything, a lot of things are blocked before they get to you, but a lot of things ultimately, even when they aren't requiring your response as an FYI, they all funnel to you. And when you're in that mode of operation, it's really tough. It becomes really tough to continuously be there, available at any time, and so forth. But no matter what, when it comes to our job, my job, the company that I run, I tell folks one thing: we may have many customers, but we are here because of our partners, AWS, Salesforce, a Snowflake, a Datadog. No matter who it is, we are here because of them. If they need us, we should find the time to have to spend it with them. We should not let them wait. We should not let them be unclear whether we are going to respond or not. We are always here, and it's worked well. And I do it even today in my current role. You got to set your priorities, but you have to find the way to do it.
So one of the things, between the difference between Cloud Sherpas and AllCloud is also, Cloud Sherpas was a very successful business, successful exit. And you're not doing AllCloud per se for the money in the same way, that you would have been doing it for Cloud Sherpas. What drives you? What drives you to work the way you do to build this business? Because it has to be different than Cloud Sherpas.
Yeah. So over the years, um, I found a lot of commonality between being athletes in the sports arenas and business. And I remember in one of those emails that I described earlier, I wrote to the team that we are essentially business athletes. Some of us may have actually been athletes. I've seen a lot of good athletes, especially in the US when the opportunity to become a college athlete is prolific, um, have become really successful business folks. But I look at us as sort of business athletes. And why I tie it back to your question is I like to win. It's fun to win. And building a successful business, the feeling that you have when it succeeds, in my opinion, not being there is like winning in a sports event. And we always say to folks that we look to acquire, because we're a smaller organization, acquiring even smaller organization, we tell them, look, this is your conference championship. The Super Bowl is when we all exit together. But this is part way. This is one step in the process. And I believe being in a winning team is fun. Um, I try to get everybody to get excited around that concept. It's not always that successful because people come for various reasons. Not everybody is as lucky to have exited before. And some have exited partially. So they have tasted a little bit of the success and want more. But people have different measurements of success. And to me, financial reward is important, very important. Uh, but I think ultimately building a successful business and it essentially exiting, which is a win in the world of business, or recognition as if you won, is the main driver today, than as opposed to the past. But I'll tell you, at Cloud Sherpas, I have never in my wildest dream expected the result that we ended with. I really wanted to just experience building a business and making it successful because I've seen others do it. And it was intriguing to me how you get there. And never imagined it would be that hard, but it was fun.
One other major difference between Cloud Sherpas and AllCloud is you now have a family, and with kids and everything, and um, that's a pretty big difference, especially when running global organization and the hours you talked about and the travel that I know you do all the time. How do you balance that?
Yeah, it required a big change, especially with me, because if you look at my lifespan, as short as it is, and I'm going on 50. Um, for the first 40 years, I didn't care about anything. We exited Cloud Sherpas when I was 40 years and change. And I didn't care about anything but to, again, charge hard towards the goal, get a result. Every time we had a success, a win, I was hungry for more. I am still like that. It doesn't really matter. By the way, kids have changed that completely. Not in how I view myself and operate in the business world, but about them. I don't have that same mentality when it comes to them needing to have the same attitude that I have, or never, quote unquote, being satisfied. However, what I had to change, and I think it was phenomenally for the better because how I operate with people that are willing to work very hard for me today, that have little kids, is very different than I would have historically. So historically, I couldn't even understand that period of like, okay, well, let's be together as a family. It's important for them to experience you, other other than in travel, obviously. Um, and then, sure, they're down. You could spend an hour or two with your wife. You could not, but you go back to work. I have a lot of employees that have that small break on their calendar where at 5:30 till 7:30, they're with the family. Comes 8 o'clock, they're willing to get on calls. They're willing to work till 1 a.m. in the morning. And that is me today. But I've learned that nothing falls short ultimately if you allow that. The issue becomes when people aren't willing to find that balance, but continue to work hard, charge hard. That's when it becomes a little more difficult. So when you have to recognize their balance, um, and and they never come back to what you want them to come back to, so that it's done on time and so forth. So for me, it was a very big difference. It was a huge change. Um, Mostly self-inflicted because I wanted to spend this time. I think kids have also gained me perspective and made me even better in terms of how to manage people, because for the couple of hours or the hour and a half that I spend with them, my mind is elsewhere. It's on a 5-year-old or a 3-year-old, and they're fascinating. The things that they say make you laugh, and they take your mind off of things. Um, More than anything else in the world, spending that time with them is the best distraction you could have. It doesn't take away from the fact you come back to the shit afterwards, but they are a great distraction and maybe even allow you to kind of have a different perspective when you get back to the computer at a later time at night.
My favorite story that I and when you talk about how you've evolved, I love the story also to tell when I joined Cloud Sherpas and I was in the office and we were all working hard and we were there every night till very late and none of us had families and I remember walking out of the office and it must have been 9:30 at night. I'm not really sure. And I walked by your office. I was probably on the job for like 2 weeks and you screamed out, "You're leaving for a half day?" And it was like 9:30 p.m. And I was like exhausted. And I was like, oh my God, I work a lot, but this guy is like at a different level. And so it it does, like you said, it gives you perspective. I think it doesn't change the work ethic, but it gives you perspective.
Yeah. At the end of the day, so many lessons are learned with experience. Not that I don't think that's still funny and it goes perfect, but what I'm saying, it is it is experience and many experiences of managing a variety of different people that makes you a much better leader. The more diversity you have with operating in different countries and different generations, older than you, younger than you, far younger than you, um, that have come from different backgrounds and so forth, it makes you such a more complete leader. And I'm far from it, very far from it. But I've learned a lot throughout the years, and the experience of giving people time, for instance, to do the things that we just talked about. And seeing that, hey, ultimately things get done. If the people are the right people, they'll get it done. They'll get it done in time. They'll get it done well, and that only comes from doing a lot of it, then working with a lot of different people in different environments.
Last question for you. What are you most excited about for the future of All Cloud?
Yeah, so a couple of different things. So all cloud, all cloud is in a space that is never going to cease to have opportunity. We're never going to end. No one's ever not going to need our help. As long as we perform at a high level in terms of the services we provide, we are more knowledgeable than the average Joe at a company. We will always be needed. The exciting parts for AllCloud is the multitude of vectors for growth that it has moving forward. So, in our view, we have an opportunity to expand our geodiversification. We are now operating, albeit in 7 countries, in 3 different territories. Those are typically territories that are aligned with our vendors. We could expand far beyond that. That will enable us to continue to evolve and grow. We could expand into other ecosystems, so long as they provide value to our customers and have something to do with the existing ones we operate in. Otherwise, it's too disjointed. And then we could actually now, at our scale, become a platform for growth through inorganic acquisitions. And we could go and find great talent, great customer base, additional skill set through those acquisitions. And I think that is part of what the future entails for AllCloud. It may not be the path it ends up at, but it is a phenomenal opportunity. And I think for far too long, if you think about it, the large system integrators, the large consultancies have really controlled a lot of the market share, rightly so. They've gotten to scale, they've operated for dozens of years, they've grown very well. Cloud Sherpas could have been a mini GSI if it had gone on for another 9 years where we are today to have included other ecosystems and being more geos than we have been. But I think there is we talk always about technology disruption. I think there's a disruption for the cloud native services subset of IT services. And I think that hasn't occurred ever. Essentially, a multi-pronged, multi-ecosystem, geodiverse partner that could actually gain more of the customer's wallet share, and take away from others that have traditionally been doing so. And I think that's pretty exciting, and that's a phenomenal opportunity for our business moving forward.
Eran, thank you very much for doing this with me. It's been a lot of fun, and it was I loved the time working together, and it's awesome to watch what you've built at AllCloud. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you, David.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, for everyone listening, hopefully you enjoyed a lot of lessons learned here. And if you did, please share this with your networks, like, subscribe, all of that. And look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Thank you. That's a wrap for this week's episode of Not Another CEO Podcast. Thanks for joining. For show notes and more, please visit notanotherceopodcast.com. We'll see you next week.